All right, everybody, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to talk about, in my opinion, without a shadow of a doubt, the greatest power forward of all time, that being Tim Duncan. And, most people, I think for the most part, I think a lot of people do agree that Tim Duncan is the greatest power forward ever. However, there is some people that will tell you that he's overrated. And I've seen videos, I've seen, articles that he's not the greatest, and there's people that's greater than him. And of course, they base it a lot off statistics and things of that nature. You can look these things up. You'll find people that, will say that Tim Duncan is not the player that everybody makes him out to be. It is articles out there. It is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I have came across even videos that have said that. Of course, people that really know the game of basketball, they know that Tim Duncan, without question, cannot be denied as the greatest power forward of all time. But for those who are not familiar with Tim Duncan, of course, a lot of people that grew up in this era that know ball, they are. But for those who are not and don't know what he did on a year-to-year basis, you're going to learn a lot about him today and what he brought to the table. And it goes past the numbers. It goes based off his impact and based off him understanding the team game and how to be a part of a system and allow his teammates to be involved. So we're going to go into that today. So let's get right into it. All right, so to start things off, Tim Duncan, he was born and raised on an island called St. Croix. If I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, anybody who's listening can feel free to correct me in the comments. But I have no problem with that. That's a part of the Virgin Islands. And when he was growing up, his first love wasn't basketball, it was swimming. One of his older sisters was a standout swimmer, and he decided to follow in her footsteps, and he was aiming to compete in the Olympics in 92, but in 89, Hurricane Hugo destroyed the only Olympic-sized swimming pool on that island, and that kind of halted him in regards to chasing that dream. And another thing that impacted him a lot when he was younger was his mother dying of breast cancer. And once again, for people that are listening, the reason I touch on these players' backgrounds like this is because it just goes to show, once again, that some of the things that people go through in life, it can really affect them. It can, potentially, hinder them from wanting to to push forward and really still try to achieve the goals they have set for themselves. And we have to be strong and not let that happen. Okay, we lose loved ones. Sometimes things get in the way of us progressing forward, but we still have to make things happen regardless. We were put here for a reason, so we have to try our best to excel each day. Tim Duncan was able to do that. However, he decided to stop swimming, and then he ended up falling in love with the game of basketball. So he played for a high school. It was called St. Dunstan's Episcopal. Once again, that's open for correction. He played for that high school, and in his senior year, he stood out and averaged 25 points a game, and he got a lot of attention drawn to him from many different colleges, but he ended up going with Wake Forest. So he played for Wake Forest for 4 years. His first year there, he took a little bit to get into his flow. He only averaged a little bit under 10 points and a little bit under 10 rebounds. And of course, each season he progressed and got better. He upped his points per game average the next season to nearly 17 points a game and 12 and a half rebounds. After that, he increased it to 19 points and 12 and a half rebounds. And then his fourth and final season, he averaged nearly 21 points a game and over 14 and a half rebounds. So he got better each season. And then, of course, by that time, he was ready to declare for the NBA draft. And let me not also forget to mention that in the 96 and 97 season, his last two seasons at Wake Forest, he did win the ACC Player of the Year. In the 96 season, he also won the ACC Tournament MVP, just for the ACC. And in 97, he also was the overall College Player of the Year as well. So he did win some awards when he was in college, of course. He stood out. They weren't able to capture a championship. But, of course, he was one of the top prospects heading into the NBA draft. So he went on to be the first pick in the NBA draft for the 97-98 season by the San Antonio Spurs. And in his rookie season, he was truly dominant. The man averaged a little bit over 21 points per game and nearly 12 rebounds, 2.5 blocks. He truly stood out as a rookie, and of course he did end up winning the Rookie of the Year. He was an All-Star in his first season, and he also made the All-NBA first team in his first season. And the Spurs had a great bounce-back season. The season before, they only won 20 games. That is because their star player at the time, David Robinson, missed pretty much the entire season that year. So they struggled, but the next year he came back healthy, and in combination with bringing on Tim Duncan, they got back on track. They won 56 games. They were beat in the second round that year by the Utah Jazz, who ended up representing the West in the NBA Finals. So they were beaten by them in 98. Then the next season, in 99, is when Tim Duncan pretty much became more of the face of the team. David Robinson kind of took a step back at this point. And the Spurs, this was the lockout year, so it was only a 50-game season. Tim Duncan would finish in the top 3 in MVP voting. He finished behind Karl Malone, who ended up winning the MVP. And the Spurs were able to actually get to the finals in just his second year. They squared off against the 8th seed, the New York Knicks. The Knicks made it to the finals that year as the 8th seed. And they surprised everybody, but when they ran into the Spurs, they were dominated. They got beaten 5 games, and Tim Duncan won the finals MVP. And he truly had an outstanding series. He averaged 27 points, 14 rebounds, and 2.5 blocks. He completely dominated that series, and this was only in his second year. And now, of course, at the time, a lot of people weren't really giving Tim Duncan his credit because, it was a lockout season, so people were just saying, it wasn't really a real season. They were questioning how legit the Spurs really were. And then from 2000 to 2002, they never were able to return to the finals. Now, in the 2000 season, Tim Duncan did get injured. So during those 3 seasons, that's the time period when Shaq and Kobe had their three-peat. 2000, Tim Duncan didn't even participate in the playoffs that year. He got injured. In 01, they made it to the conference finals. They squared off against Shaq and Kobe. They got beaten really badly in a 4-game sweep. The last 2 games, they got demolished by over 30. I think one of the games was by 40 points. They completely got demolished in 02. So in 02, Tim Duncan won the MVP. He was the league MVP that season. And that was the season he had his career high in points. He averaged, for the regular season at least, he averaged 25.5 points per game throughout the season, over 12 rebounds, 2.5 blocks. But then he upped it all in the playoffs. He averaged 27.5 points in the playoffs, averaged over 14 rebounds and over 4 blocks. Of course, they were bounced in the second round. Again, they were beat by Kobe and Shaq. Most of those games were close. Tim Duncan stood out in that series. They just got beat. It was a 5-game series, but a lot of those games did come down to the wire. Of course, that duo of Kobe and Shaq, that was pretty much, the object that was in the Spurs' way during that time period in the early 2000s. But Tim Duncan did his thing. He held his own, but they weren't able to overcome them. It wasn't until the 02-03 season where he won his second MVP in a row. Of course, his numbers were a little bit down. His points went down to about 23 per game. His rebounds and block shots numbers remained the same. But it wasn't until the playoffs which Tim Duncan truly stood out and dominated. He had one of the greatest playoff runs of all time. He was amazing in the 2003 playoffs en route to winning his second championship. That was the year that they ended up being able to dethrone the LA Lakers. They sent them packing in 6 games in the second round. They were able to beat Dallas in the conference finals. Dirk did go down in that series. They were up 2-1. When Dirk did go down, they beat them in 6 games. And in the finals, he stood out, averaging 24 points, 17 rebounds, and over 5 blocks. And in Game 6 of the NBA Finals in 03, where they were facing off against the New Jersey Nets, he nearly had a quadruple-double. Like, he was about, 2 blocks shy of having a quadruple-double in the finals. The man had 21 points, 20 rebounds, 10 assists, and 8 blocks in the NBA Finals, man. So he was tremendous in those finals. He was tremendous throughout the entire playoffs, where he averaged 24 points, 15 rebounds, 3.5 blocks, about 5 assists. He was doing it all for the Spurs that year. And at that point in time, he was viewed as the best player in the world. And that would end up being David Robinson's last season. And that actually was Manu Ginobili's first season. So Tony Parker came in 2002, and then Manu Ginobili came in 2003. And that was David Robinson's last season. And then going into 2004, that was the year that the Lakers brought on Karl Malone and Gary Payton. So they were the favorites to come out the Western Conference. And Tim Duncan and the Spurs were beaten by them in the second round. Now, that second round, what happened was they was tied 2-2, and the Spurs, they had a lead in Game 5. Tim Duncan hit a go-ahead shot in Game 5 with 0.4 seconds left, and that's known as the 0.4 seconds game because Derek Fisher got an inbound pass and made a shot within 0.4 seconds, and then the Lakers went on to win Game 6 to close them out. And, of course, that was the year the Lakers lost in the finals to Detroit, which would be the team that Tim Duncan and the Spurs faced the next year in the finals, because the next year the Lakers were broken up. Shaq went to Miami, Karl Malone retired. Gary Payton might have, I don't even know if he went to Miami right away. I think it was one team before he ended up going to Miami. But that season, the Spurs, featuring Tony Parker as an improved player and Manu Ginobili making his first All-Star team, they were able to make it to the finals that year. They knocked off the first seed Phoenix Suns in the conference finals in Steve Nash's first season. And they went to the finals, and it was a hard-fought defensive series against the Detroit Pistons. Of course, Detroit was trying to win back-to-back. They weren't able to do so and went to 7 games. And it was not really competitive throughout the first 4 games. All the games were blowouts. Game 5, Robert Horry hit the game-winning shot in Game 5. He iced the game with a 3-pointer. And Game 6, they lost at home. Game 7, they were able to seal the deal. Tim Duncan was the MVP of those finals. His overall statistics in that series were not as great as his prior 2 series when he won MVP in the finals, but he still was giving you 20 points per game. His efficiency was a bit lower, but at the same time, he was going against a Detroit Pistons team who had great defense with Rasheed Wallace and Ben Wallace, but it was a slugfest, but the Spurs were able to get the job done. They came back the next year, and they finished with the number 1 record in the Western Conference. They won 63 games, and they were bounced in the second round, though. The Dallas Mavericks, who won 60 games that year, led by a fully healthy Dirk Nowitzki, they beat them in a classic 7-game series. This was a series where the Spurs came back 3-1 to tie the series up, and then they lost at home in Game 7 in overtime. It was a great series. Dallas went on to lose in the finals to the Miami Heat. And then the next year, Dallas came back. They had the best record in the NBA. They won 67 games. The Spurs finished as the 3rd seed in the Western Conference. However, Dallas was upset in the first round and by Golden State, the We Believe team with Baron Davis and them. They were upset. And that pretty much opened the door for the Spurs. The only team that was in their way was the Phoenix Suns. Around that time, the Spurs kind of had the Suns' number. Of course, that was a series where Amari Stoudemire did get suspended. And the Spurs were able to capitalize. They beat the Utah Jazz in the Western Conference Finals with Darren Williams and Carlos Boozer. And then they squared off against the up-and-coming Cavaliers team led by LeBron, and they swept them. Tim Duncan was stellar throughout the playoffs. His most dominant series was against the Phoenix Suns team, and that was their stiffest competition. Tim Duncan stood out in that series. Of course, he put up his usual double-double numbers throughout the course of the playoffs. But in the finals, he did struggle a bit. He only averaged about 18 points, which wasn't too bad, of course. He averaged, 12 rebounds. He did lead the team in assists, averaging a little bit over 3.5 per game. Of course, the Spurs were so well-rounded with their passing. It was really nobody on that team that was just dishing out that many assists, even Tony Parker at point guard. It wasn't really about one person averaging a lot of assists. It was just about ball movement. He was dominant on the boards. He had over 2 blocks per game. And he wasn't the MVP, though. Tony Parker was awarded the MVP because he led the team in scoring, averaging 24 points, and then he also shot very efficiently, over 50%. Tim Duncan didn't shoot that great, but he still was the most dominant player overall. But they gave Tony Parker the MVP, and that's cool. So that was Tim Duncan's 9th season, and of course, he's now a 4-time champion in 9 seasons, a 3-time Finals MVP. He didn't even have to play another game of basketball to me to be recognized as the greatest power forward ever, but of course, he kept playing. So You know, from that point on, from the '07 season onward, the Spurs didn't make another final appearance until 2013. The next season, they got to the conference finals, and they lost to the Lakers with Kobe and Pau Gasol in 5 games. Then after that, in '09 and in 2010, they were, well, let me start with '09. '09, they were beaten the first round by the Mavericks in 5 games. In 2010, they lost in the second round. They were swept by the Phoenix Suns. And then in 2011, they finished with the number 1 seed in the West. They won 61 games. However, they were upset by the 8th seed Memphis Grizzlies that year. And then in 2012, they were the number 1 seed again. Now, 2012 was another lockout season. It was 66 games played, and most people did view them as the best team in the West. However, the young and up-and-coming OKC Thunder with Durant and Westbrook and Harden, they were able to, I'm not going to say really surprise people like that. They were the 2nd seed, but they did pull off a victory over the Spurs that they might have not really been favored in, and then they got to the finals and lost to the Heat. And it wasn't until the next year that the Spurs were able to finally get back to the finals. Of course, that was the year that the Thunder were favored again, or they were favored that year to get to the finals, but Russell Westbrook was injured that year in the playoffs. So that opened the door for the Spurs, and they were able to get back to the finals, and they squared off against the Heat. And that was a classic all-time great final series that, you know, most people do know about that have been watching basketball in the 2000s and in the 2010s. The Spurs versus the Heat. Tim Duncan is literally a Ray Allen 3-point shot in the corner away, a Game 6 3-point shot in the corner away from being 6-0 in the finals, man. And, you know, that would have been a tremendous achievement, but Ray Allen did save the day in Game 6, and that's not to take a shot at LeBron James at all. I know how LeBron James fans are, but he did save them in that series with that shot. Of course, they ended up losing in Game 7. LeBron was extremely dominant, and that was the only finals that Tim Duncan did lose. However, they came back the next year with a vengeance, and they beat the Heat in 5 games. Tim Duncan had a very consistent playoff run. The Spurs were very well-rounded that year. I think they had about 5 players throughout the playoffs averaging at least double-digit points per game. And that teamwork and chemistry that they had was the reason they were able to dethrone the Miami Heat. And that would be the last championship that Tim Duncan won, and he ended up retiring in 2016. Retiring as a 15-time All-Star, a 15-time All-NBA team member, 10 on the first team, 3 on the second, and twice on the third. Also making the All-Defensive team 15 times as well, 8 on the first and 7 on the second team. And to me, that's what sets him apart from other great power forwards all time, because it's not even really just what he did on offense. It's how he impacted the game defensively as well, making all those defensive teams and really standing out on defense throughout the entirety of his career. Please keep in mind, during his 19-year tenure with the Spurs, they never missed the playoffs one time. If that's not the model of consistency, I don't know what is. There's really not too many players that can say throughout their career they never missed the playoffs in that span of time. So Tim Duncan, without question to me, there's no doubt in my mind he is the greatest power forward of all time. He is a top 10 player all time. There may be some people that even argue he's in the top 5. To me, he was like a modern-day Bill Russell. Not saying he played just like him, but you can't just go off his numbers because his numbers are not gaudy. All right? But it's about his impact. It's about his style of play, being conducive to winning, being able to fit alongside other teammates, allowing them to get their shine, being unselfish, being coachable. That's a part of a player's greatness. Being able to fit into a system, knowing that they could put up all the great stats they want, but they're trying to win because it's a team game. So that was a pretty lengthy video. I see the time on this video now, but I hope that everybody's attention span is long enough to get educated on how great Tim Duncan is. And also, please let me know, everybody that watches my channel, if you guys like the videos with music or without music. Sometimes I can't always make up my mind. I like to switch it up. Let me know what you guys prefer. But most importantly, hopefully you guys were educated today. And I thank everybody that views my channel. I appreciate all the love and support. And as I always say, everybody have a blessed day. Glory be to God. Thank you again.